So we've had Copilot and ChatGPT and the other LLMs for over a year now. And studies are starting to be done on whether or not these actually increase or decrease code quality. And one of the people that did a nice study are those from GitClear. And I'm kind of going meta here because I'm going to react to a reaction, because this Visual Studio Magazine article, I feel like the author really summarizes everything really well. And I'd like to add some commentary to these points. And in short, there is a decrease in code quality that is being detected, and I'm not surprised. Let's talk about why. So the Coding on Copilot white paper that GitClear did, it's looking at the quality and maintainability of AI-assisted code compared to what would have been written by a human. And they specifically state, is the code more similar to the careful, refined contributions of a senior developer, or more akin to the disjointed work of a short-term contractor? Now, right away, I got my hackles raised a little bit, because short-term contractors, if they're writing disjointed code, they're not very good contractors. I do contracting, people around me in my circle do contracting, and we do short-term work, and a competent developer is able to fit their code into an existing code base without it being disjointed. So, if that's something that they're seeing a lot, they're really bad at hiring contractors. Now, that aside, how did they actually do this study? What were they really looking for? And they say that what they were looking for is code churn, the percentage of lines that are reverted or updated less than 2 weeks after being originally authored. And they noticed that compared to 2021, that the code churn was going to double in 2024. And then they further find that the percentage of added code and copy-pasted code is increasing in proportion to updated, deleted, and moved code. And in this regard, AI-generated code is not dry. Do not repeat yourself, because people are just copying and pasting what comes out of the LLM directly into the code base. Now, this code churn thing, all that really means is, like, if I'm writing some code, I think I'm done, and I push it into the repository. And then somebody else looks at it, or somebody else finds a bug or a tweak, and they come back and they re-edit it really quickly. Now, over time, it's absolutely appropriate and common for code to be modified. The life cycle of software, the initial creation, is much shorter than the maintenance of code. And that's why we like these principles like don't repeat yourself, and why we use dependency injection. Good enterprise software that needs to stick around for a decade should be designed with maintainability in mind, because the maintenance is the most expensive part of the project. Now, what they're saying is people are lazy. Shocker, people are lazy. And they're going in and they're writing poor prompts, and the LLM doesn't have full visibility of the project, and it is putting code into the repositories that is duplicate code, low quality code, it's missing features, it's probably missing, validation and other checks. But because developers are pressured to write code quickly, they're putting substandard code into the repositories. Now, that may get the job done, but if the code churn thing is happening, now all of a sudden you're doing the work twice, and you're often having senior developers and more expensive resources that have to come in and fix these things. And overall, that is a net negative that LLMs are creating. Well, not really the LLMs, it's the developers that are being lazy that are creating these problems. So human nature aside, GitClear has 3 significant changes since Copilot's introduction that they've detected. And the first one we already talked about, the burgeoning churn. So we're having a lot of code churn, a lot of things being edited and removed in a very short period of time. They also detected less moved code, which implies less refactoring and less reuse. Now, if you're a beginner developer, a lot of times people watch my tutorials, or they look at senior developers and they think, wow, these people just crank out perfect code per specification in one shot. And that is absolutely not the truth. There is a reason why, when you're working with unit tests, there's a phrase called red-green refactor. So you write some tests, they're failing, they're red. You write the minimum amount of code to pass the test. The test goes green. But that first take at solving a problem, you're learning about that problem domain. And when you're done and it's working, oftentimes you'll look at it and say, okay, how can I improve it? Did I repeat myself? Should I organize my methods differently? Should I move things around? Are there utility functions that I wasn't aware of in other parts of the code base that I should pull in and use? And these are all things that come out in the development process and the code review process. And what they're suggesting here is that AI assistants discourage this process because they give you code, it works, you're lazy, you want to get stuff done, you're under pressure, and you just copy paste that code in there, and then you never go through the refactoring process. You just skip that step. And it's expedient, but it's going to bite you later. And then they go on to say that more copy pasted code implies future headaches. There is perhaps no greater scourge to long-term code maintainability than copy pasted code. In effect, when a non-keyword line of code is repeated, the code author is admitting, I didn't have the time to evaluate the previous implementation. By re-adding the code instead of reusing it, the chore is left to a future maintainer to figure out how to consolidate parallel code paths that implement repeatedly needed functionality. That's a lot of big words, okay? This is a beginner channel. So let's break this down. Let's say that you are in an enterprise code base for a giant bank like JP Morgan Chase, and you write some formula, some calculation. And instead of writing it just once and putting it in a method that everybody else can reuse, you copy paste that method throughout the code base, 10, 20, 30, 40 different files in different packages that all need to be compiled. And then something changes. Maybe, the government, the regulator or something changes the way that formula is allowed to work. Well, now instead of just going to one method and making the change right there to the formula and getting on with your life, you have to go hunt down those 30 and 40 places and recompile everything. And that is a huge, huge burden to put on future developers. And I can tell you as a professional developer, when you're working with historical code, oftentimes you'll come to hate that developer, and oftentimes that developer is you. So these shortcuts, these expedient things, they really kick the can down the road and make somebody else's life a lot harder. So when you're working with these LLMs, it's really important that you don't take those shortcuts and that you're aware of your code base and you're aware of repeating yourself and avoid doing that, because that kind of code is really expensive to maintain. And if that's the kind of code that your senior developers see you putting into the repositories frequently, you're going to the top of the layoff list. So these are all really good insights, and they are data-driven. I'm linking the report in the description below, so you can go take a look at it if you want to. This is just human nature. I mean, humans want to get their work done as quickly as possible. And then businesses are trying to move fast. They're putting pressure on developers. Some of it's laziness, some of it is pressure, some of it's a bad culture. But either way, there is going to be a massive amount of cleanup that needs to be done based on these developers using this type of workflow. And if you haven't seen my previous video on whether you should use ChatGPT to learn coding, I recommend you go check that out, because I recently had a conversation with one of my viewers who has been using LLMs to learn, and they outsource their brain to the LLM, and they're copy pasting code into their projects. And they claim that they completed a whole bunch of projects, and then they went to an interview, and when in the interview they didn't have access to the LLM tool, they weren't even able to do basic things, and they bombed the interview. You don't want this to be you. Yes, AI is the future. You do need to learn to use these tools, but you can't skip the step of learning the fundamentals and learning how things work. AI as a tool should be used to enhance your productivity, not replace it. Happy coding.